Did you know that the most polluted country in the world is not a great industrial power, but a small nation with a gigantic fight for survival? Bangladesh, a vibrant country steeped in history, is slowly suffocating in an invisible cloud of pollutants that threatens millions of lives daily. But what is really behind this silent crisis? And why doesn't anyone talk about this? The truth is that while the world focuses on other problems, Bangladesh becomes the scene of an environmental and human tragedy. Are we about to lose an entire nation to pollution before we understand what is happening? In this video, you will discover what no one tells you about the silent devastation that is turning Bangladesh into the epicenter of a global crisis. Now, click like and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second. Pollution can seem like a distant threat, something we see in the news from time to time. But what few know is that in some corners of the world, it is a devastating crisis that is already part of daily life. Bangladesh, for example, is the epicenter of one of these environmental catastrophes. When we think about curiosity about countries, we hardly imagine that such a vibrant and culturally rich place would be suffocated by a cloud of pollution. What is happening there is not just an environmental problem, but a true public health emergency. The invisible air carries deadly particles, and the population faces the effects of this toxic cloud every day. It is curious to think that, while in some countries environmental laws advance, in Bangladesh, industrial and economic progress has caused a brutal drop in air quality. Every time your citizens breathe, they are inhaling poison, and that is something we cannot ignore. This problem is not limited to large factories, but is also present in villages, on congested streets, and in crowded markets. And what makes this even scarier is that most of these people have no idea the severity of what they are facing. They live a routine surrounded by a threat that is not seen, but that little by little is killing them. But how did Bangladesh get to this point? The answer is not simple. Between the rush for modernization and the desire to compete in the global market, something was left aside: people's health and the preservation of the environment. While large corporations continue to produce at a rapid pace, the quality of life is deteriorating. There is a complexity here that few see: the desire for development versus the preservation of a nation. What Bangladeshi leaders and citizens need to understand is that life depends on a delicate balance, and that balance is out of control. Looking at the situation in Bangladesh, we realize that this is not an isolated crisis, but part of a global crisis. Other countries face similar dilemmas, but few with the intensity seen here. Curiosity about the country, you ask? This is a big one. How is it possible that such a dynamic place, with so much history, is about to collapse under the weight of its own pollution? And now you will discover how it all started and how far this chaotic scenario can go. The story of how Bangladesh became the most polluted country in the world is complex and nuanced. It all started with the race for economic development, a growing desire to keep up with global progress. But this progress came at a high price. Unbridled industrialization, without due environmental concern, transformed the country into a true center of pollution. What we see today is the reflection of decades of decisions focused on immediate economic growth, ignoring the long-term consequences. And this race for success generated an environmental tragedy, which affects both large centers and rural areas. The absence of efficient environmental regulation allowed factories to emerge en masse, releasing pollutants into the air without any control. In Dhaka, the capital, factory chimneys have become part of the landscape, spewing smoke non-stop. This lack of care on the part of the industries is one of the main causes of the current state of the country. While other nations create strict laws to protect the environment, Bangladesh appears to have been left behind, trapped in a cycle where industrial progress is prioritized above all else. It's a curiosity about countries that is often ignored. how rapid development can actually have devastating consequences. Poverty also plays a crucial role in this equation. With few resources, the government faces difficulties in implementing effective policies to combat pollution. For many, the dilemma is clear. Choose between supporting their families or protecting the environment. The people of Bangladesh find themselves in a true impasse, where immediate survival takes priority over long-term concerns. Unfortunately, this choice is part of the daily lives of millions of people. In a reality where the basics continue to be a struggle, environmental health ends up taking a back seat. At the same time, the desire for constant economic development has created a dependence on polluting industries. The country's economy is supported by brick, textile, and other factories, which are largely responsible for high levels of pollution. Without incentives to innovate and without infrastructure for change, the cycle continues. Bangladesh, a country with so many cultural riches and vibrant history, now bears the burden of being one of the most polluted places on the planet. But how did the brick industry become one of the biggest villains in this scenario? This is what we will see next. Among the biggest contributors to pollution in Bangladesh, the brick industry stands out as one of the most devastating. However, few know how these small red blocks, so essential for construction, are poisoning the country's air. Demand for bricks grew exponentially, driven by urban expansion and accelerated development. To meet this demand, thousands of archaic brick kilns spread across the country, burning coal inefficiently and releasing large amounts of pollutants into the air. What many see as progress actually hides one of the biggest causes of the environmental crisis. These brick kilns, used in both urban and rural areas, run on outdated technologies that emit huge amounts of carbon dioxide and toxic particles into the air. It's a common scene in Bangladesh. Furnace chimneys release thick smoke that obscures the horizon. These factories, often located near poor communities, directly affect the health of residents. And the problem goes beyond the air. The land around the ovens is devastated, with no possibility of recovery, becoming true deserts of pollution. Curiosity about the country? Here is one of the most tragic. The price of urbanization is being paid with people's health. Furthermore, the impact of this industry is not limited to air quality alone. The workers in these brick factories, who often live in inhumane conditions, face a brutal reality. Poorly paid, exposed to dangerous working conditions, and without adequate protection, they are also direct victims of this cycle of pollution. For many, this is the only means of support, but the cost is high: their own health. Reports of respiratory illnesses among these workers are common, and future generations will inherit a devastated environment. It is a clear example of how the pursuit of economic development has profound side effects. Looking at the impact of the brick industry, it is clear that something must change. But what to do when this industry is one of the bases of the local economy? This is where the dilemma intensifies. The modernization of factories is necessary, but how to convince a population that depends on this work? How to balance the urgency of change with the need for immediate survival? These are questions that become even more urgent as we explore the next aspects of this environmental crisis in Bangladesh. If there is a visible symbol of pollution in Bangladesh, it is in the chaotic streets of Dhaka. Here, old vehicles dominate the roads, releasing black smoke with every kilometer traveled. These cars, buses, and trucks, which are many decades old, contribute greatly to air pollution. The lack of effective regulation allows these old machines to continue circulating, further aggravating the situation. In countries where sustainable development is prioritized, modernizing the vehicle fleet is one of the first measures taken. But in Bangladesh, the reality is different. Chaotic traffic and obsolete vehicles are a time bomb for public health. Dhaka, one of the most congested cities in the world, suffers from endless traffic jams that turn the streets into chambers of pollutants. At every traffic stop, the engines of these vehicles continue to run, emitting toxic gases that invade the air we all breathe. The impact of this uncontrolled traffic is not only visible in the skies darkened by smoke, but is also felt in the chests of those walking the streets. Air pollution in Dhaka is not only a matter of quality of life, but also a matter of survival. It is a curiosity about countries that few know, how traffic can be one of the biggest environmental villains. Modernizing public transportation could be a solution to this problem, but so far, the initiatives have been insufficient. Promising projects are launched, but are hampered by a lack of infrastructure and a limited budget. Meanwhile, the population continues to depend on old and obsolete vehicles, without a viable alternative. One of the solutions seen in other countries, such as India, was the implementation of transportation systems powered by natural gas or electricity. However, in Bangladesh, the implementation of these technologies still seems far away. The question that remains is, how long will it take until the necessary changes occur? Apart from old vehicles, Dhaka's congested streets are a reflection of uncontrolled urbanization. The city grows non-stop, and with it, the number of cars increases. But the infrastructure does not keep pace with this growth, and the result is chaotic traffic that paralyzes the city on a daily basis. People spend hours stuck in traffic, inhaling pollutants without even realizing the seriousness of this exposure. This vicious cycle of pollution and traffic is something that needs to be broken, but doing so will require more than small improvements. What lies ahead are even greater challenges, and air pollution in Bangladesh is just one of the many problems that will have to be addressed. Air pollution in Bangladesh is an invisible enemy, a silent killer that steals people's health and lives without them immediately realizing it. We're talking about a danger that lurks in every breath, carrying with it deadly particles known as PM2.5, which are too small to see but large enough to cause serious damage to the lungs and heart. These airborne particles enter the body subtly, but their effects are devastating. In other parts of the world, air quality is strictly controlled, but in Bangladesh, industrial advancement has overtaken any concerns for the population's health. The effects of air pollution are not just theoretical. They manifest themselves daily in hospitals full of patients with respiratory diseases. From children with asthma to seniors with heart disease, air pollution affects all ages. The most alarming thing is that for many, the symptoms appear gradually, without clear warning. Air that appears clean is actually loaded with toxins, and the price paid for this is not just a matter of individual health, but of society as a whole. Are you curious about countries? In Bangladesh, breathing has become life-threatening. If we compare with other countries, the situation in Bangladesh is extreme. While nations such as China and India also face pollution challenges, both have implemented stricter control measures, such as the use of industrial filters and low-emission zones. But in Bangladesh, these solutions are still in their early stages. The population, without many options, continues to live in areas where the air is far from being breathable. The impact on life expectancy is notable, and this means that the next generations are born in a compromised environment, breathing air that shortens their days without them realizing it. More vulnerable populations, such as older people, face an even greater threat. With more fragile immune systems, they suffer the most from the increase in hospitalizations and deaths related to pollution. The numbers are alarming. Every year, thousands of people die prematurely due to prolonged exposure to pollutants. What should have been an environmental problem has become a public health emergency. And the worst thing is that for many, there is no way out. Country fact: Bangladesh is one of the places where the simple act of breathing can shorten life expectancy. Bangladesh's medical infrastructure is not equipped to deal with this exponential increase in pollution-related diseases. Hospitals are full, doctors are overworked and resources are scarce. Entire families suffer the consequences, often without adequate access to treatment. It is common to see endless lines of people waiting for care, while pollution continues to worsen their health conditions. The health system, which was already facing challenges before the crisis, is now on the brink of collapse. This is the price Bangladesh is paying for its rapid and unbridled industrialization. Since pollution directly affects public health, it is clear that something needs to be done urgently. However, it is not just about treating the symptoms, but about preventing this crisis from getting even worse. The next important point is to understand why environmental education, a key element for change, is not present in everyday life in Bangladesh. Environmental education in Bangladesh is practically non-existent, and this represents one of the biggest obstacles in the fight against pollution. As the country faces a public health crisis caused by air pollution, few have access to clear information about environmental dangers or how they can help mitigate the problem. Lack of awareness about the health risks related to pollution prevents the population from taking measures to protect themselves. In countries where environmental education is a priority, children grow up understanding the importance of caring for the environment. But in Bangladesh, this knowledge remains a privilege of a few. In schools, the curriculum rarely includes topics related to pollution and sustainability. Many students are never exposed to discussions about how their actions impact the environment, and a lack of knowledge makes it difficult to change harmful behaviors. If future generations do not learn from an early age about the importance of taking care of our air and water, the problem is likely to get worse. Countries like Finland and Japan incorporate environmental education from basic education, teaching not only the concepts but also their practical application in daily life. Bangladesh urgently needs to follow this path. Successful global campaigns could serve as an example for Bangladesh. In countries like Mexico, recycling and environmental preservation campaigns were widely publicized and, over time, became part of the culture. The same could happen in Bangladesh, but this requires investment in public campaigns and educational programs. Local media, for example, could play a crucial role, promoting programs that teach people about the devastating effects of pollution and how each person can make a difference. Are you curious about countries? In Bangladesh, this lack of educational initiatives makes the crisis even worse. Without proper education, the cycle of environmental destruction continues. People unknowingly contribute to the problem, and future generations would inherit an even more polluted country. But what prevents significant changes from occurring? The answer often lies in politics, where financial interests and corruption block important progress. Now is the time to explore how political inertia and corruption have contributed to the worsening of this environmental crisis. Politics in Bangladesh is deeply rooted in economic interests that often ignore the well-being of the population and the environment. Government inertia, combined with endemic corruption, creates a scenario in which few significant changes are taking place to combat pollution. Politicians often profit from polluting industries, protecting corporate interests at the expense of public health. Instead of implementing stricter environmental regulations, many prefer to maintain the status quo, fearing that restricting pollution could slow economic growth. The result? The population pays the price with their health, while the elite continue to benefit. Corruption also directly affects the application of the few existing environmental laws. Even when regulations are implemented, oversight is minimal. Entrepreneurs manage to escape fines or closures through bribery and political influence. This creates a culture of impunity, in which the biggest polluters face no real consequences for their actions. Countries like Bangladesh, where politics often serve the interests of a few, face an almost insurmountable barrier to implementing meaningful change. It is a frustrating reality for many citizens who find themselves powerless to act. Environmental bills often do not advance in Parliament. Promising initiatives to reduce pollution are held back by endless bureaucracies or interest groups that profit from environmental destruction. There are several examples around the world of nations that have managed to implement profound environmental reforms, despite facing political resistance. However, in Bangladesh, the feeling is that the government is paralyzed, unable or unwilling to make the necessary bold decisions. The future of the environment appears to be in the hands of a political system that so far has done little to reverse this crisis. And so, the crisis perpetuates. The population continues to suffer the effects of a government that does not seem to prioritize their health or the future of the country. But all is not lost. There are international organizations and NGOs trying to fill the void left by government inaction. They have been working in Bangladesh with the goal of mitigating the damage and are the focus of the next point in this story. In the midst of the environmental crisis in Bangladesh, NGOs and international organizations emerge as the population's few allies. These entities, often working with limited resources, attempt to combat the damage caused by pollution through projects that aim to both raise awareness and mitigate it. Organizations such as the UN and the World Bank have played an important role, investing in programs that promote sustainable development and the reduction of carbon emissions. However, the challenges are enormous, and the impact of these initiatives often seems like a drop in the bucket compared to the size of the crisis. Local NGOs play a vital role in the fight against pollution, especially when it comes to education and awareness. In areas where the government does not provide adequate support, it is these organizations that step in to educate the public about the dangers of pollution and how they can protect themselves. Some successful initiatives include recycling programs and encouraging the use of cleaner energy sources. These actions, although small, have the potential to generate big changes in the long term. Countries like Kenya and Ethiopia have managed to reduce their pollution levels thanks to the support of NGOs, and Bangladesh could do the same. However, even with international support, Bangladesh's future remains uncertain. Aid programs are often limited in scope and duration and rely on external funding that is not always guaranteed. Furthermore, collaboration with local government is not always harmonious, which limits the effectiveness of projects. No matter how hard NGOs and international organizations try, the ultimate solution to Bangladesh's environmental crisis depends on stronger domestic action and a change of mindset on the part of the government. Meanwhile, the population continues to suffer the effects of this unbalanced struggle. Despite the challenges, there is hope that with greater global and local cooperation, stronger solutions can be implemented. NGOs and international organizations have already shown that with the right resources, it is possible to reverse the course of pollution in severely affected countries. But in Bangladesh, pollution is not the only environmental problem. The country also faces frequent natural disasters, such as flooding and rampant deforestation, which further worsen the situation. We will explore these challenges in the next topic. Bangladesh is already choked by pollution, but its environmental challenges go far beyond that. The country faces frequent floods, which not only devastate agricultural areas, but also worsen pollution problems. With the arrival of intense rains, rivers and streams overflow, dragging garbage, toxic waste, and chemicals with them, further contaminating soils and water sources. These floods, which should be a manageable natural phenomenon, become even more catastrophic due to pre-existing pollution. The effects are not only immediate, they leave deep scars on the environment and public health, worsening an already critical situation. Uncontrolled deforestation has also played a crucial role in amplifying these natural disasters. As more forests are cleared to make way for agriculture and urban expansion, ecological balance is lost. Trees, which once acted as natural barriers against flooding, are now absent, leaving low-lying areas vulnerable. Deforestation not only contributes to increased flooding, but also accelerates soil degradation, creating desert areas incapable of supporting plant or animal life. Are you curious about countries? Bangladesh, already facing a pollution crisis, is seeing its forests rapidly disappear, making the situation even worse. The effects of deforestation in Bangladesh are not only ecological, but also social and economic. With fewer forests, communities that depend on wood for their livelihoods and land for agriculture lose their sources of income. Rural people, already suffering from pollution, now face the loss of their productive lands and live under the constant threat of floods and landslides. The cycle of poverty and environmental destruction continues, and, without quick and decisive action, the future of these communities looks bleak. Other countries face similar dilemmas, such as Brazil, where deforestation in the Amazon also puts the global environmental balance at risk. Although flooding and deforestation are already a challenge in themselves, they are interconnected with pollution, forming a network of problems that feed on each other. To truly understand the magnitude of this crisis, we must look at the people of Bangladesh, especially ordinary citizens, who face this reality on a daily basis. They are the ones who feel, with greater intensity, the effects of this environmental destruction, as we will see below. In Bangladesh, pollution is not an abstract concept. For ordinary citizens, it is a visceral reality that directly affects daily life. Entire families live in the middle of smoke, in streets where the air is dense and the lungs seem to work twice as hard to capture pure oxygen. Life under these conditions is a constant challenge, and stories of families battling respiratory illnesses have become common. A mother who sees her children grow up with asthma attacks. A father who, working in factories, carries toxic smoke in his lungs every day. It is these invisible lives that suffer the most serious consequences of rampant pollution. Health in everyday life in Bangladesh is compromised. Respiratory diseases are a constant plague, and simply walking around Dhaka or any other major city can pose a health risk. Those who can wear masks, but the majority do not have access to these small resources. Furthermore, for many, illnesses are not a priority. The focus is on putting food on the table and surviving another day. Pollution, although lethal, is often ignored in the name of immediate survival. Country curiosity. Bangladesh is one of the few places where the daily effort to survive includes learning to deal with the disgusting air. Despite all the difficulties, there is a growing environmental activism movement in Bangladesh. Small groups of ordinary citizens began to organize, fighting for their right to breathe clean air. From protests to community tree planting initiatives and cleaning up contaminated areas, citizens are slowly trying to make a difference. Inspired by global movements like Fridays for Future, these local activists face not only pollution, but also the lack of government support. The challenge is enormous, but they continue to believe they can make a change. The struggle of ordinary citizens in Bangladesh is the embodiment of a country trying to survive in the midst of a massive environmental crisis. While older generations face the consequences of pollution, there is hope that future generations can inherit a cleaner, healthier environment. But for this to happen, we must act now. And, looking ahead, what can we expect if nothing is done? This is the next step in this journey. If Bangladesh's current situation is already critical, the future without action seems even bleaker. If nothing is done, environmental collapse may be inevitable. Every year, air pollution gets worse, meaning more illnesses, more premature deaths, and a worsening decline in quality of life. Imagine an entire generation growing up, never knowing what it's like to breathe clean air. This is the reality that the country will face. Pollution, already intrinsic to everyday life in Bangladesh, will continue to shape the lives of its citizens, creating a nation where health is a luxury that few can enjoy. The number of lives lost to pollution will continue to increase. Life expectancy, already affected by pollution, is expected to fall further. Children born today in Bangladesh may live less than their parents, not because of a lack of medical advances, but because they inhale poison every day. Most alarming is that pollution-related deaths are often not directly counted. They manifest as heart attacks, chronic respiratory problems, and other complications that, if investigated in depth, show the true face of the environmental crisis. Curiosity about the country? Bangladesh could become one of the most tragic examples of how environmental neglect affects entire generations. The future of the next generations is uncertain. If environmental problems are not resolved, the youth of Bangladesh will inherit a devastated country. They will live in a land where the forests have disappeared, the rivers are polluted, and the air is unbreathable. Agriculture, one of the country's main sources of livelihood, will also be affected by environmental degradation. Without drastic measures, the economy, which already faces profound challenges, will become even more fragile, leading the country not only to environmental but also economic collapse. The cost of ignoring the environmental crisis will fall on everyone, especially future generations. This is the moment when a decision must be made. Continuing down this path means accepting a bleak future, where environmental collapse is a certainty. However, there is hope as long as drastic measures are taken now. Air pollution, although one of the most visible crises, is only part of the problem. Water pollution is also plaguing the country, and that is what we will explore next. Air pollution in Bangladesh is a devastating crisis, but it is not the only problem facing the country. Water pollution is another major challenge that affects millions of people every day. Rivers, lakes, and waterways, which should be sources of life, are now polluted by untreated sewage, industrial waste, and pesticides used excessively on crops. These contaminated waters, which are often used for human consumption and irrigation of crops, put the health of the population and food security at risk. The impact of this is felt across the country, where access to clean water has become a luxury for a few. Bangladesh's rivers, like the iconic Buriganga River, are symbols of this crisis. Buriganga, once the heart of life in Dhaka, is now covered in a thick layer of garbage and chemicals. The smell is unbearable, and its waters are no longer habitable for fish and other aquatic life. Pollution in Buriganga is a reflection of the lack of control over industrial and domestic waste disposal, and many other rivers suffer the same fate. Fun fact about the countries: Bangladesh, with its rich river tradition, is now struggling to save its waters from unprecedented pollution. Agriculture, one of the main economic activities in Bangladesh, also suffers from water pollution. Chemical products used in excess in crops end up infiltrating watercourses, contaminating not only the soil, but also groundwater reserves. This affects food production and puts the health of those who consume these products at risk. The cycle of destruction perpetuates and affects not only water resources, but also the economy and food security. In a country where agriculture supports millions of families, this water crisis could have devastating consequences. The difficult task of cleaning Bangladesh's rivers requires more than small local initiatives. It requires coordinated action at the national level, with the participation of both the government and NGOs and the international community. But even with all these challenges, Bangladesh continues to face another global environmental crisis: climate change, which makes the situation even worse. This will be the focus of the next topic. In addition to air and water pollution, Bangladesh faces a global enemy that further worsens its environmental crisis: climate change. Although the country contributes relatively little to global carbon emissions, it is one of the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Rising sea levels threaten to submerge vast coastal areas, forcing millions of people to move inland, worsening social and environmental problems. The phenomenon of high tides, coupled with increasingly intense storms, destroys communities and causes devastating floods. Bangladesh's future is directly linked to global climate action, but the country faces a race against time. Climate change not only amplifies the frequency and intensity of floods, but also affects agriculture, one of Bangladesh's main sources of livelihood. Crops are destroyed by floods and droughts that were once rare but have now become frequent events. The impact of this is being felt directly by farmers, who are struggling to secure their livelihoods in an increasingly unpredictable environment. In addition, food insecurity worsens as the advancing waters lose fertile soil. The combination of climate change and pollution generates a scenario of uncertainty and vulnerability. One of the most worrying consequences of climate change is rising sea levels, which threaten to permanently flood Bangladesh's coastal regions. Millions of people living in low-lying areas could become climate refugees in the coming decades, forcing mass migration into the country. This not only places a burden on cities already affected by pollution, but also increases competition for scarce resources such as drinking water and food. The climate crisis in Bangladesh is one of the biggest curiosities about countries facing the disproportionate impact of global climate change. The interconnection between pollution and climate change leaves Bangladesh facing a battle on multiple fronts. It is not only about saving the natural environment, but also about protecting the future of millions of people. However, this crisis also offers an opportunity to rethink the way the country develops and invest in sustainable technologies that can save lives. The following topic explores precisely the economic impact that these environmental crises have caused and how this influences decision-making in the country. The environmental crisis in Bangladesh not only affects public health and the environment, but also the country's economy. Widespread pollution has direct consequences on the productivity of the population, especially in urban and industrial areas. Workers who suffer respiratory problems and other pollution-related health complications end up missing days of work, negatively impacting the economy. The workforce, weakened by constant exposure to toxins, becomes less efficient, resulting in a drop in national productivity. And this loss is not measured only in numbers. It directly affects the families who depend on these jobs. The economic cost of pollution to the government is equally devastating. Public health spending skyrockets as more people fall ill and need medical treatment. Frequent hospitalizations and the need for long-term treatment for chronic diseases drain resources from the health system, which is already insufficient to meet demand. Countries facing similar crises, such as India and China, have realized that the costs of inaction are far greater than investments in pollution prevention and control. For Bangladesh, the choice between ignoring pollution or tackling it is also a choice between spending more in the future or investing now. Pollution also hurts Bangladesh's ability to attract foreign investment. International companies, especially those concerned about sustainability and global image, tend to avoid investing in countries where pollution is a serious problem. Poor air quality, polluted water, and poor infrastructure make the country less attractive to companies seeking cleaner, safer environments. Thus, the economy suffers another blow, since pollution not only affects the health of the population, but also compromises opportunities for economic growth. It is a vicious circle in which pollution reduces the country's development potential. The truth is that the economic impact of pollution is profound and affects all sectors of society. Without decisive action, the country risks falling into an even more serious economic crisis. However, there are examples of countries that have managed to reverse similar problems by balancing economic growth with environmental protection. China, India, and several European countries have achieved notable results with bold environmental policies. Bangladesh can learn from these examples, as we will see below. There are examples around the world of countries that faced serious environmental crises and managed to reverse the situation. China, for example, known for having some of the most polluted cities in the world, has adopted strict policies to combat air pollution. They have implemented emissions control zones, invested in renewable energy, and developed one of the largest electric public transportation networks on the planet. The changes did not happen overnight, but the impact was significant. Today, some regions of China that were once choked by pollution are beginning to see blue skies again. Bangladesh could draw inspiration from this trajectory, but it would require a real commitment to environmental reform. India has also faced similar challenges, especially in its big cities like New Delhi. Air pollution reaches alarming levels during certain times of the year, but the Indian government has taken significant steps to combat the problem. One of the most impactful initiatives was the introduction of vehicles powered by compressed natural gas, CNG, a cleaner alternative to diesel and gasoline. Additionally, India has launched national reforestation campaigns and reduced dependence on coal in its power plants. These steps show that even in emerging economies, it is possible to find solutions to reduce pollution. European countries also serve as an example. In the 1950s, London faced an environmental crisis known as the Great Smog, when air pollution caused thousands of deaths. This led to the creation of strict environmental laws, such as the Clean Air Act, which helped dramatically reduce levels of air pollutants. More recently, cities such as Paris and Copenhagen have become models of sustainability, promoting cycling, clean public transport, and urban green spaces. Bangladesh, with its growing pollution problem, could learn a lot from these successful initiatives. These global examples demonstrate that with political will, investment in clean technologies, and the collaboration of society, pollution can be mitigated. However, the real key to success is adapting these solutions to the local reality of Bangladesh, where dependence on polluting industries and poverty create additional barriers. Fortunately, the advancement of sustainable technologies can open new doors for the country, as we will see below. The adoption of sustainable technologies is one of the greatest hopes to reverse the environmental situation in Bangladesh. The country has enormous potential to use renewable energy, such as solar and wind, due to its climate and geographical location. Solar energy, in particular, has already begun to be explored in rural areas, where traditional energy networks cannot reach effectively. Bangladesh has excelled in installing solar panels in remote villages, bringing clean, affordable electricity to thousands of people. Expanding this initiative to urban areas could drastically reduce dependence on fossil fuels. Another promising example is the production of ecological bricks, an innovation that could transform one of the most polluting industries in the country. These bricks are made with less energy and emit fewer pollutants in the process. If Bangladesh's construction industry, which today relies on outdated and highly polluting furnaces, adopted this technology, the environmental impact would be significantly reduced. Countries like Mexico are already using eco-bricks on a large scale, and Bangladesh could follow this trend. The modernization of civil construction is essential to combat pollution in the long term. In the transport sector, the use of electric vehicles and sustainable public transport systems can also be a solution to the congested and polluted streets of Dhaka. Many cities around the world, such as Amsterdam and Copenhagen, have invested in electric bicycles and buses, which has helped reduce carbon emissions and improve air quality. For Bangladesh, which faces critical problems with its aging and inefficient vehicle fleet, transitioning to cleaner transportation systems would be an important step. Additionally, improving pedestrian and cycling infrastructure in crowded cities could ease pressure on public transport. Bangladesh's future depends on its ability to innovate and adopt technologies that minimize environmental damage. However, these changes need political and financial support to be viable. If government and civil society come together around these solutions, Bangladesh can transform its environmental and economic landscape. The next topic will address the urgent policy reforms that must be implemented for these sustainable changes to become a reality. For Bangladesh to overcome its environmental crisis, government solutions are crucial. The first step is to implement urgent political reforms that address the pollution problem with the seriousness it deserves. This includes the creation of stricter environmental laws that regulate industrial emissions and the use of polluting fuels. The government also needs to establish efficient monitoring mechanisms that severely punish violators. Today, many businessmen manage to escape sanctions for corruption or lack of supervision. But with more transparent and stricter policies, Bangladesh could begin to rein in its polluting industries. Another necessary action is the creation of incentives for companies that adopt sustainable environmental practices. Tax incentive programs, for example, could encourage factories to modernize their operations using cleaner, less environmentally harmful technologies. These initiatives have already been applied in other countries, such as Germany, where companies that invest in renewable energy receive important tax benefits. In Bangladesh, creating an environment conducive to green innovations could reduce resistance to change among industries, which are often concerned about the cost of modernization. Furthermore, the government needs to invest in green infrastructure and sustainable public transport. Creating more green areas in cities, improving public transport, and promoting the use of electric vehicles are measures that have already proven effective in other countries. In Dhaka, building dedicated corridors for electric buses and improving public transport services could reduce the number of vehicles on the streets, reducing congestion and consequently polluting emissions. These are viable solutions that require a long-term commitment, but can generate tangible results. Finally, stricter control of emissions from industries and vehicles is essential. Implementing stricter emission standards and continuous monitoring of factories can ensure that pollution is brought under control before it reaches unsustainable levels. Additionally, the government can impose heavy fines on companies that violate environmental regulations, creating a system that prioritizes environmental preservation. However, these solutions will only work if there is collaboration at all levels, from central government to local communities, which also play an important role, as we will see below. While the government plays a key role in creating policies and regulations, local actions are equally important in the fight against pollution in Bangladesh. Communities across the country have the power to make small changes that, together, can have a significant impact. Community groups can lead cleanup campaigns, plant trees, and raise awareness about recycling and proper waste disposal. Many of these actions are already underway, organized by NGOs and volunteers, and show that, even in the midst of a crisis, it is possible to make a difference. The strength of a united community can be seen in the small villages that, on their own, have already begun to adopt sustainable practices. Every citizen has a role to play. In cities like Dhaka, where traffic is a major source of pollution, simply walking or using a bicycle instead of a car can reduce polluting emissions. In countries like Denmark, the use of bicycles is encouraged, and it has become part of the local culture. Bangladesh can learn from these examples by promoting the use of cleaner modes of transport in urban areas. Additionally, communities can collaborate to reduce the use of single-use plastics and improve waste management. Initiatives that, if expanded, would help mitigate environmental impact. The power of communities also extends to education. Local awareness campaigns, led by community leaders, can teach the importance of preserving the environment and the consequences of failing to do so. Environmental education does not have to come only from schools. It can be a collective initiative coming from parents, neighbors, and friends. Fun fact about the countries. Bangladesh, with a rich tradition of community cooperation, has the potential to mobilize its people towards a cleaner, healthier future. However, these changes will only have a lasting effect if the community is encouraged and supported in their efforts. Finally, the example of self-sustaining villages in other parts of the world can inspire Bangladesh. In some countries, small villages have implemented rainwater harvesting systems, solar energy, and organic farming, creating a circular economy that benefits both the environment and the local population. This type of innovation can be adopted in rural Bangladesh, helping to reduce pressure on natural resources and offering a sustainable alternative to development. But for these initiatives to prosper, it is essential that there is a cultural change throughout the country, as we will see when we look at the future of the environment in Bangladesh. The future of the environment in Bangladesh depends on the decisions made today. If the necessary changes are implemented, the country has the opportunity to reverse the damage caused by pollution and create a healthier environment for future generations. But this will require a joint effort between the government, civil society, and international organizations. Possible scenarios for Bangladesh's future vary. If environmental reforms are seriously implemented, the country can become an example of environmental recovery, like nations that faced similar crises and managed to turn the tide. There is potential, but it needs to be harnessed urgently. On the other hand, the risks of inaction are clear. If the government and the population continue to ignore the seriousness of the crisis, the future will be bleak. Pollution will increase, life expectancy will decrease, and quality of life will be severely affected. The much-desired economic development will end up being undermined by the environmental crisis itself. Countries that did not act in time to address their environmental crises saw their economies and populations suffer disastrous consequences. Bangladesh risks going down the same path if radical measures are not taken. However, the new generation of Bangladesh brings hope. Young people are more aware of environmental challenges and have a genuine desire for change. With access to information and a more globalized vision, these young people are ready to lead a green revolution in the country. The role of youth will be crucial to transform the mentality of the coming decades, both in education and in political action. It is vital that they have the tools and knowledge they need to fight for a cleaner, more sustainable future. This generation could be the key to saving Bangladesh from imminent environmental collapse. With a change in mindset and immediate action, Bangladesh can not only overcome its current crisis, but also serve as an example to the world. However, the window of opportunity is rapidly closing. The question now is the country prepared to act before it is too late? Let us finally explore the urgency of taking immediate action and the role that every citizen, government, and international entity can play in this process. We have reached a critical point in Bangladesh where time to act is running out. Pollution, the climate crisis, and environmental challenges can no longer be ignored, and each day that passes without action further compromises the country's future. The urgency to implement change has never been clearer, but this responsibility does not fall solely on the shoulders of the government. It belongs to everyone, from ordinary citizens to large corporations and international organizations. The future of Bangladesh depends on a collective effort, where each person understands the importance of preserving the environment. It is a decisive moment where each election can determine the course of an entire nation. Collective responsibility is what will define whether Bangladesh will sink under the weight of pollution or be reborn as an example of environmental resilience. Every citizen has the power to contribute, whether by reducing the use of plastics, adopting sustainable practices, or supporting initiatives that promote the use of clean energy. The government, in turn, needs to listen to the people's cries and implement policies that prioritize health and the environment. The time to act is now, before the consequences are irreversible. There is hope, and it is found in small actions that together can have a big impact. Environmental awareness is growing and, with it, the possibility of real change. As we look to the future, we must understand that protecting the environment is not just an ecological issue, but a survival issue. If everyone plays their part, whether locally or globally, Bangladesh can reverse the course of its environmental crisis and create a healthier, more sustainable future for its citizens. Now, the decision is in our hands. Will we continue to move towards collapse, or will we unite to save what can still be saved? The answer lies in collective effort, immediate action, and the desire to transform what seems impossible into reality. The destiny of Bangladesh depends on each one of us. Are you ready to be part of this change?
Hey explorers, if you love discovering the amazing curiosities and stories we share here on Exploring Nations, how about supporting the channel with just $1? This small gesture can make a big difference and is essential to keep this content going. Without your support, our journey might be cut short. And there's more. When you shop on Amazon, use our special link. It costs you nothing extra, plus you get an exclusive discount and it helps us out a lot. The links for donations and Amazon are pinned in the first comment. Don't let this adventure stop, we're counting on you. Subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and drop us a comment.